made it 10 pages before I was like, I actually can't do this. I don't know how I feel about this. Like, the font is small and the paragraphs are long. Hi, I'm Sam, and this is Sam Shelves. And today we'll be discussing all of the books that I read in March. And I'm having trouble enunciating, so if you can't understand me, I apologize. I'm doing my best. I think I read 8 books in the month of March, but I'm not very good at counting, so, we'll see. So let's just get into it. I started with finishing Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. I did like this book. I really struggled with finishing this book. I started it multiple times. I have a hard time with stories that involve enslavement. They can be really difficult for me to read, and Homegoing is the story of essentially the lineage of 2 half-siblings throughout time, and it does start with the transatlantic slave trade. So that was difficult for me to follow, and so it was a little bit hard for me to get into, and it does involve a lot of the oppression of Black folks throughout time, which is not always fun to read. But I do think that it was written very beautifully, and there were, I guess, interesting juxtapositions as we follow these 2 lineages kind of across the world. And so overall, I did like this, but it was not that fun to read on a number of occasions. I will be keeping it, but it was a challenge for me personally. Then next we had a bit of a banger that was way more fun to read, and that was The Incandescent by Emily Tesh. This is an adult fantasy that follows a woman who is the headmaster of a magic school within a boarding school, and her challenges. And I had such a good time with this. I think that it was both compelling plot-wise and fun. Like, I really enjoyed the characters in this novel. And so even when there wasn't necessarily a lot of action happening, I was invested in what was going on. It felt like a very realistic portrayal of what it might be like to be the administration of a music school, or a magic school, sorry. And so if you have ever thought about how, Dumbledore doesn't seem to have a real job, like he doesn't seem to be doing a lot of managing the school in the Harry Potter universe, then I think you would enjoy this. I think I really enjoyed Dr. Walden. I thought that she was a very lived-in character. I will say that I think some of the side characters at times didn't feel as fleshed out. There's also a romantic subplot that I liked, but I think could have been fleshed out a little bit more. But overall, I really enjoyed this book. I'm definitely keeping it, and I would recommend. Then I finished Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse, and Black Sun was good. I felt like this book was a bit like the first 5 episodes in a Game of Thrones season. It felt like a lot of setup and a lot of mostly just like vibing. There was a good amount of tone setting in this. And there were definitely characters that I was rooting for, but I didn't necessarily feel like the plot was propelling us forward as much. Which is fine. I mean, I enjoy characters, so the fact that I was mainly invested in the dynamics between characters and not necessarily in what they were doing for a good chunk of this book is okay. But I did find myself questioning, like, where are we going? Like, what is happening? It's very clear this is an adult fantasy. I don't know if I said that. This is an adult fantasy, and we're sort of following different perspectives of different characters, and it's clear that they will all meet together at a ceremony for a solar eclipse. There we go. There's a solar eclipse, and we're following the leader of a faction that sort of is in control of the continent that this takes place on, and her like political dealings within that faction. We're following a young woman who is the captain and also is a member of a group, an ethnicity that has been almost been eliminated. And we're following a young man who has been told that he has a great purpose. And it is clear that all of these people will meet together towards the end of the book. And so there is kind of that plot wise, but I do think that a good amount of it felt more like day-to-day stuff, very routine. And so I don't know how I feel about that. I think I enjoyed Black Sun, and if sort of palace intrigue and the dynamic, like character dynamics there are interesting to you, then I would, I don't think it would hurt to pick this up. I don't know that I fell in love with this book at any point. And so I think I'm going to keep this for now because I do have the second book in the series, Fevered Sun. And I'm interested in reading the second book, but I think my opinions on Fevered Sun will determine whether or not I continue to keep this in my collection. Because this was okay. It wasn't bad. And like I said, I did really enjoy some of the characters in this book, but I finished this like 2 weeks ago, and I haven't really been thinking about it much since then. So, there's that. Then next we have a book that was very hyped on Book Talk a couple of years ago. And I just finally got to, which is Divine Rivals, which is a book I own 2 copies of because I did hear really great things. And I had already purchased this book and the second book in the series, Ruthless Vows. And because I found them at my library bookstore, and then I saw this cover, and I love this cover way more than this one, personally. Yeah, here's the problem I have now. Divine Rivals is I would say, new adult fantasy. It reads a little bit young. The characters are like 18, 19. But it does also it's not dealing with, school or anything like that. It's more work and war. So it takes place between two people who are who are rivals at a paper, competing for the same job, and they're sort of dynamic. They are the rivals. And then also our FMC is a member of a lower class family who really struggles financially, and her brother is called by the gods in this world to fight. So there are 2 main gods who are in active conflict, and that's where the war in this novel originates from. And so her brother chooses to go and fight on the lines of this war. And so we follow her as she really struggles to kind of come to terms with the nature of the war, and she kind of tries to find her place. And we do get some perspectives from him. I do definitely think it's more her book than it is his. He also has his own challenges, especially when it comes to being more well off and having a father who is very aspirational in terms of their status. So I think that I actually enjoyed this book more than I thought I would, because I think that the dynamic between these two is fun. I think that they have good banter. I think that, it is, rivals is such a great term for these two specifically. I think they make it's a great rivals to lovers arc. And so I think that in general, the romance for most of this book is very strong. The problem is I do actually feel that it is a little rushed towards the end of this book. And I feel also that plot-wise, the book feels rushed towards the end. And so I actually was giggling, kicking my feet for 75% of this book. And then the last 25% of this book, I had whiplash. I was like, I don't know I don't know how I feel about this. And it's not even necessarily that the end of the book feels completely out of nowhere. I think that there are plenty of things that are set up that make it feel warranted. I can't, there's like only so much I can talk about this, but I feel like in terms of the romance between the two main characters, I felt a little bit rushed toward the end. The conflict outside of these two felt a little bit, I don't know, underdeveloped maybe. And so like I said, I really loved the first 75% of this book, and the last 25% of the book was okay. It ended okay. So here's the problem is I think I will keep this. I do think that I will read the second one, but the book that I want to keep is this one. And the book that matches the second book is this one. So yeah, every month when I go through like all the books that I've read for the month, I decide whether or not I want to keep them based on like how much I liked them. And I'm like, again, just like much like Black Sun, like whether or not I actually keep Divine Rivals will depend on how I feel about Ruthless Vows. And that's a problem because basically if I want to keep it, I'm going to keep both. But the one that matches the second book is just not as appealing to me as the one that is not the more appealing cover. So, I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do yet. That's a problem for a different video, but my opinions on Divine Rivals is it was good. I enjoyed it more than I was expecting, but it wasn't great. It didn't end well enough for me to be like stoked on it. So that's Divine Rivals. Oh, I think actually, I can't remember if it was before or after Divine Rivals, but I completed The Compound. I'm sorry, I can't remember the author right now, but I'll try to put in a photo of the book. I listened to this via audiobook, and I overall thought it was really interesting. This is a sort of dystopia cross between like the Hunger Games, Survivor, and like Love Island, with a heavy emphasis on Love Island. But it doesn't feel like a romance to me. I think overall, the audiobook especially was really interesting because the narrator seems very disaffected, like very like emotionally steady. It feels very like not necessarily monotone, but kind of that vibe. And I think it's great. I think it's very befitting the tone of the novel. And so I actually really liked the audiobook performance for this book, and I think it really increased my enjoyment in terms of the book. But again, this is a situation where the end didn't necessarily feel in keeping with the tone of the book to me. And I don't really know what I wanted otherwise. But yeah, so this is a compound that exists. And it very much like Love Island, like people need to couple up in order to be able to stay in the villa, and people are banished from the villa periodically. And the goal is to be able to stay to the very end because you get all kinds of gifts. You get to make requests and you get to compete in tasks in order to be able to get more things that you like and are able to take home at the end. So the goal is to stay to the very end, because if you stay to the very end, then you can make any request that you want, or a number of requests. It does actually come out that there are limitations to that, but you can make any request that you want. You can sort of gather stuff, and people usually, if they stay to the very end, will make a bunch of requests, like kind of hoard a bunch of stuff and then leave the villa with all their stuff. And so our main character is determined to make it to the very end no matter what. But it is like, it feels there is an underlying threat of violence the entire time. Both like externally, like outside of the compound, it's very unclear what's out there, but it seems very scary, and also like internally within the confines of the compound. And so I think that was really interesting. And I say this as somebody who loves watching Love Island, but I think that the sort of critique of why it is that people will put themselves like essentially throw themselves to the wolves in the form of, you know, reality television, and how like manipulative reality television can be. I think that's really great commentary. And overall, I thought it was really compelling and really interesting. But I do wish that I don't know that the ending was different. I don't know what to tell you. Like, not necessarily even like the logistics of like what happened, but in terms of like getting from point A to point B, it felt a little rushed. I was texting my friend after I finished it, and I said that I it felt like the ending was like discordantly romantic, because that's how it felt. It was like this book didn't feel like a romance at any point, and it didn't necessarily towards the end, but it did feel low-key kind of romantic the way that it ended. And so yeah, I don't know. The ending again was a little bit disappointing to me, but overall, I thought it was really interesting, and it definitely made me think quite a bit in general. So it is a book that I would buy. Again, I listen to it on audio. Most of the audiobooks that I listen to are from the library, so I don't own it myself, but it is something that I would buy a physical copy of. So that is The Compound. We have My First Love and Other Disasters. This is actually like a compendium of like 3 books, I think, that I've owned for a long time. I picked this up because the back says that it is a like sizzling summer romance, and there is a suggestion that there's a love triangle. And I know that love triangles are controversial, but I actually personally am someone who loves a love triangle. And so I picked it up because I thought it could be fun to get invested into like a 3-book long love triangle. And so I started it. I picked it up this month, and I made it 10 pages before I was like, I actually can't do this. And I DNF'd. I DNF'd this book, and I feel great about that. That was the right decision, because the writing was just very immature. And again, this was described as a sizzling summer romance, but the main character in this book is like 13, I want to say. And I don't think any 13-year-old can have a sizzling summer romance. I'm sorry. They can have a cute romance. They can have a dramatic romance, but sizzling? That's crazy. That's a crazy assertion to make about a 13-year-old. But let me just read you some of the writing. I don't know if I can find some examples of like what was so painful to read. Oh, okay, there we go. I probably forgot to tell you that there's another small problem, and that is that the love of my life has absolutely no idea I even exist. But no sweat. I've arranged for our beautiful meeting to take place Tuesday at Howell's. I guess a shoe store for the orthopedically fashionable doesn't sound like the most romantic place for an encounter, but that's where he works on weekdays after school. The only other choice was his Saturday job, digging cesspools. Anyway, I'm not worried because I've worked out every detail, so it can't miss. And listen, did I read books like this when I was YA? Absolutely did. There's a large collection of Meg Cabot back here, okay? And that's kind of the vibe. But unfortunately for this book, I wasn't 12 when I picked up this book, so it didn't work for me. I do read young adult. I read middle grade. But obviously as an older reader, I prefer less annoying writing. So I DNF'd My First Loves. But you know what? I got it off my physical TBR, and that's what's important. Because I have 200 books on my physical TBR, so you know what? Every book is a win. Every book is a win. The next book that we finished is Eating While Black, Food Shaming and Race in America by Psyche A. Williams Forson. This is a book I picked up on a whim. This is a nonfiction about the politics of eating, obviously. And I picked it up simply because I saw it at my library bookstore and it sounded appealing to me. It sounded like one of my special interests. And I think overall, I'm glad that I read this. This is very academic writing. And it was really difficult for me to like process the information. It was also like very dense writing. Like the font is small. And the paragraphs are long, you know? Again, very academic writing. I think, like I said, I'm glad that I read it, but I don't know that I will be referencing it often, or be recommending it very often, because it's too academic for the average reader, and like people who are already interested in this subject probably will just pick it up on their own, you know? But I do want to read a quote from the book just to give you an idea of what is discussed in the book. So William Sforson references another academic, I believe, Charlotte Biltkoff. Sorry if I'm not saying that name correctly. But she quotes Biltkoff saying, "If we're going to bother with this at all, we may as well start to imagine a new way of thinking that starts from the premise that dietary health cannot be considered from a purely scientific or medical perspective. Dietary health cannot, of course, also be considered from a purely cultural perspective either. So talking about food is going to require some very radical, productively unsettling conversation, collaboration, and cross-fertilization across social, disciplinary, and professional divides." I think that that's a lot of this discussion, is how often discussions around health and food and diets can fall into the trap of demonizing people who are outside of the in-group or the privileged culture, and obviously this disproportionately affects Black people. So basically, how often Black people are demonized for being fat or for not having the proper diet as determined by like white societal standards. And so I think all of those are like very interesting ideas, and like I said, I'm glad that I read it, but I don't think that I'm going to reread it. So I am glad that I read it, but I don't think I'm going to be keeping it. If that is like the kind of thing that you would be interested in, and if you're not dissuaded by very long paragraphs, very small text, and academic writing, I do think that it is a worthwhile read. So yeah, that is Eating While Black. Last book that I read in the month on the Trans Day of Visibility is Moonflower by Kacen Callender. This is a middle grade fantasy novel about a young child named Moon who is non-binary and who is depressed. And Moon regularly escapes to a different world, the spirit realm, essentially, through daydreams. And Moon is trying to figure out a way to stay in the spirit world because they just don't feel that they can have any joy in our world. And that is how the main character refers to it. Moon says that the real world, as it were, is our world, and that their world is the spirit realm, and so they're just trying to figure out a way to stay where they belong. And I think that this novel is like very beautifully written. I really enjoy Kacen Callender's writing in general, and yeah, I had a really enjoyable time, and I also felt that it really I spent a lot of time thinking about sort of some of the large ideas. I did find myself wondering on a number of occasions how this is a middle grade, though, because unlike my first loves, which felt really young and annoying, this at times was like very challenging for me to process conceptually. And so I don't know, man. I was like having a hard time figuring out, you know, whether or not a 12-year-old could follow along. But I think, you know, honestly, a lot of it, whenever I read a YA that maybe reads a little bit older, or in this case, a middle grade that feels like it reads older, I think that I have to remind myself that children are actually more capable than we think they are. And, you know, I remember the feeling of being a 12-year-old where people sort of consistently undermined my like intellectual capacity. As much as I feel like this does read older, so if you have a younger reader, a middle grade reader, who maybe struggles, this would be certainly a challenge for them. And it also does deal with heavy topics. Like I said, Moon is depressed, and Moon does not want to be here anymore. And so this is heavy subject matter. But I think the reality is that there are children like Moon, 12-year-olds, who are depressed. And it makes me a little bit emotional. Case and Calendar in the intro page says, "For the younger me who didn't want to be in this world anymore, I'm so glad you stayed. And for anyone who has also wanted to leave this world, I'm glad you're still here." And so it is fairly heavy for middle grade, but I do think that there's a lot of value in this. I will say that it feels a little bit dated because Moon in the real world is in a pod because of a health scare that led to people having to socially distance. So in that way, I think the book came out in 2022. In that way, it feels a little bit dated. But it was really beautiful. And I think that there are many people who have experienced depression, especially children or people who experienced depression when they were children, who could get a lot from this. Case and Calendar is an incredible writer, and they definitely put a lot of their heart into this book. And so I really enjoyed it, and I will be keeping it. So that is my recap for the month. It was a pretty decent reading month. I do feel like I am like on par with the level I want to be reading. And so I hope that I can sustain this and continue. Cutting back on my screen time has definitely helped. Really helped with my general like emotional well-being, general demeanor, and ability to focus on reading books. So would recommend. But yeah, have you read any of these books? Are there any books that you would recommend based on what I did and did not like about the books that I recommended this month? Do you feel like you had a good reading month? Please let me know in the comments. And yeah, I will see you next time. Bye.